What we don't say, or what we say in a way that we don't understand the impact of, is really what's causing problems inside of our organizations.
Welcome to the People Powered Solutions podcast. In this show, you'll gain expert advice and tips on building a thriving workplace culture with happy employees. I'm your host, Lorianne Duguay, and I'm thrilled to be spending this time with you today. Hello, and welcome to another episode of People Powered Solutions podcast. Today, we welcome Kelly Charles Collin. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you for having me, Lori. I'm so happy to be here.
We're really grateful for having you. So how about you tell our listeners a little bit about Kelly? How did Kelly come to do what you do today?
Oh, wow. So Kelly today is a professional speaker, corporate trainer, and a speaker for mentors. But it started out way back when.
I love stories that start like that. Those are the best.
Way back when, in 1995. I started practicing law in 1995. I was a public defender. And then in like 3 years later, I decided that it was so funny. I was in court one day and I was looking at my clients and I was like, yeah, you and I can't be in the same tax bracket, because at the time they weren't paying us. And I was, I have student loans. So I was like, it's time.
You have bills to pay.
Right. And so I was like, it's time to move on. And so I became an employment law trial attorney, which I did for over 20 years. And then in 2019, I lost my job. They told me that they could no longer afford to pay me. And what was interesting is that even before that happened, so the end of 2017, I had started to get this real itch of wanting to leave the practice of law. Like I wanted to transition out because I'd been a trial attorney for so long. It's a lot of work. I love the courtroom, but I don't like all the build up to getting into the courtroom.
Yeah, I hear you.
Right. And so I started thinking, what is it that I could do? And I wanted to be a speaker because I had done training my entire career. I had been a law school professor, university professor. I had taught the police academy, the corrections academy. So I was always teaching and I was speaking while I was practicing law. And so I was thinking, this is a way for me to continue to create an impact, but just, do it in a different way. So I made this list of what I wanted to do, is to be a professional speaker, to write a book, and to do a TEDx. So that was the end of 2017.
That was your bucket list. You say, I've lost my job, building a bucket list.
This is before.
The itch had already started there.
Yes. This is while I'm in the practice of law, thinking about what it is I want to do moving forward. And I made this list. And in 2018, an 11-month period, I did all three. I was like, okay. And so I had been really, planning, but like you have these dreams and these goals, and then you think, yeah, but I got this job over here that like you get this good, I always say this good paycheck, every 2 weeks. And so sometimes it's kind of hard because you're like, go out here and do entrepreneurship or stay right here and get this check.
I call them golden shackles, right? I was 21 years, worked for the same organization for 21 years. I was completely checked out of my job, but I agree, the pension, the benefits, all that stuff kept me tethered to my desk because despite having all these side hustle passion projects that really filled my cup, I was like, oh no, I have to stay with, the security of that job.
And it's so funny because we have those thoughts. And I had a conversation in that time period. I had a conversation with a woman and I was talking to her about, what I wanted to do and where I was, and having this kind of golden shackles conversation. And she said, well, what is it that you fear? And I said, my biggest fear is financial instability. And she said, I want you to know that right now where you are the most financially unstable. She was like, tying your whole existence to this one paycheck. She's like, because when they're ready for you to go, it's over. And so I kept that in my mind, but I was still, the 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And then, started to realize that this is the path that they were going on. It was the path that I was going on. And one of us was going to do it first. They just ended up doing it first. And so, in that moment, just really having to decide, well, you said this is what you want to do. You put this out in the universe. are you going to do it? Because the universe has now called you to account.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so just had to decide. And I just said, well, we're just going to go for it. Like, we're going to go for it. And, you know, here I am 3 years later. It was in the height of the pandemic. That
I was about to say, like, of timing wise, that you would have made this decision in the height of the pandemic.
Yeah. And it's funny because so my job officially ended December 31st of 2019. So here we go, January 1st, 2020. We're like, yeah, let's go. And then pandemic's like, hold up, wait a minute.
We're just going to have you pause on that process for just
that speaking thing that you're thinking of doing. But it actually ended up being a good thing. So
yeah, everything happens for a reason. I'm a firm believer of that. And it's funny, timing wise, we have quite similar paths where I had been wanting to do, I'd been doing this side hustle for a long time of consulting and helping organizations with their workplace cultures. But then again, I was tethered and I didn't want to leave. And I felt like something at one point is just going to push me out. Something's going to happen that I'm going to know beyond the shadow of a doubt that this is my time. Right. And so it was, pandemic had not even hit yet. 2019, I'm still thinking about, I'm just about to take the leap by the end of December. And then we start to hear rumblings of what's going on in China. I'm like, man, maybe this is the universe saying, not yet, Lori.
Right.
You hang tight. My husband's in the dental field. So I didn't want, you know, if something were to happen, I know they're one of the first that gets stopped work. They don't really want people playing in people's houses in the height of a pandemic. So I had to pause for that year, but it was an interesting pause in that it gave me time to really reflect in terms of what I want specifically. What do I want that future state to look like? And so I was able to pivot accordingly. And really, when I did decide to take the leap at the end of 2020, it was a well-informed, risk-managed leap. And it gave me that security in those first few months of, you know, you're terrified that it might not work out, that something might happen. And for me, my biggest fear was having to go back to that job.
Yeah. And still, I mean, even now, like, you know, I've been out 3 years, right? And that still is a fear. I just don't want to go back to anybody's job right now. The great thing about being a lawyer is that I can always have my own business, but I love doing what I do now. I love not having court deadlines and dealing with opposing counsel and doing all those things. But it's hard sometimes because you just like, I remember that good paycheck.
Absolutely. I find that fear's no longer there. Now it's that I find that the dreams keep getting more and more ambitious in a good way. And suddenly I'm finding myself wanting to grow the practice to be able to broaden the scope of my impact on organization. Ultimately, I want to make more workplaces a happier place and more fulfilling place to work. I can't do it solo. So I've started to grow my team. And then suddenly that's where some of the fear comes in where, okay, I got to make sure these people are leaving because I'm getting people who are, you know, really great at this kind of stuff. They're leaving other positions for our company. So I want to make sure that I'm able to continue growing the company and assuring their security, right? It's
right, because now you're responsible for them, right? It's a different level. It's a different level of responsibility. And I think that is something that we underestimate when we are making these transitions, right? Because many of us, probably Lori, I love your hair. I look at you, I'm like, she's a visionary and a creative, right? And so many of us are that. And so we're always creating things. And sometimes we don't really take into account all of what there is. So like I practiced law for 20 something years, but I didn't have to run a business. You know, I had my own law firm at one point, but I didn't really have to do a lot of the things that I have to do now in running my business. And it also helps with us, like in the area that we're in terms of like really looking at employees and how you run a business and how you take care of people and being responsible. Like, you know, I have an assistant who I'm responsible for her, right? This business has to make money because I'm responsible for her. Now, obviously I could always lay her off, but that's not what I want to do, right? And so even these situations that we're in inside of our own businesses, I think make us even more valuable to our clients in the space of really helping them to create cultures.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's get into that culture piece.
Yeah.
Because it's my jam. It's what I'm very passionate about. And from what I've read about you, you're extremely passionate about that as well. You speak about courageous conversations a lot, right? So how about you tell us a little bit more on, when it comes to courageous conversations, what are some of the deterrents, I'm going to say, because so many people think it's easier to just sweep it under the carpet. It'll resolve itself, but they don't realize that it just makes for a huge obstacle when trying to walk around that whatever thing is swept under the carpet. So tell me about your experience with courageous conversations and how you've helped some organizations get a bit more on board with having those harder conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to put a pin in what you just said, like what we ignore festers. So, as an employment lawyer, one of the things that I learned, trying cases and representing organizations for so long is that what we don't say, or what we say in a way that we don't understand the impact of, is really what's causing problems inside of our organizations, right? So when we would get cases that we have to defend around discrimination or harassment or retaliation, any of those types of things, it's what was communicated. Now, this communication could be verbal communication. So oftentimes we think courageous conversations are just verbal, but it could be verbal communication. It could be emails, right? And emails will get you in trouble in a hot minute. And even nonverbal communication, right? So what happens is that a lot of people, not most, many, I don't know, but there are people who are not confrontational, or there are people who just would rather just let it be. But those types of pushing off, those types of ignoring these situations only make them worse. Because even if you have not spoken it, or you have not put it in an email, it's in your mind, right? Your mind is going through this. You're playing this story all the time.
Chatter is going.
That's right. And our brain doesn't like gaps. And so it's going to fill in the story. So if you've ever thought about a conversation, like you've had the whole conversation in your head, like what you're going to say, what they're saying, and we're like going back and forth in our head. And we need to actually have those conversations out loud. Like we really need to have the conversations. And what happened was when George Floyd was murdered, these types of conversations became so vitally important in organizations, which as an retired employment lawyer was really fascinating to me, because we've never been able to have these conversations around race and racism. Like you would not have those conversations. And so, companies started hiring me to do their listening sessions and talk about unconscious bias to really get people to speak. And what I learned in doing all of those was that it's not that people don't want to talk. It's not that they don't want to have these conversations. They don't know how. They didn't know how to have the conversations. They were afraid of what to say, how to start the conversation. They were afraid that they were going to destroy some relationship. And what I also learned is that people were afraid to find out things about themselves.
I know about their blind spots. They're very comfortable living in that denial of the blind spots. Right? Yeah, no, for sure.
And so Raymond James had hired me with Dr. Janetta Cole to do their first ever town hall on race. And after that, they asked me to train some of their leaders on how to engage in these conversations. So I ended up writing a mini book called Conversations Change Things, and I developed the perfect framework for courageous conversations. And so now that's what I work with. I work with corporations and their leaders and their employees to really help them to develop the process to be able to have these conversations, right? To give them the skills and the tools. And now I've expanded it where it's now called the Convo Catalyst Experience. So I've created a card deck. I'm writing a new book to really do an in-depth training in the organization so that we actually take them through the process. My trainings have been about really telling them the process at a high level, but this is now really taking them actually through the process, through role playing, so that they get the practice, because it's the practice that's going to help.
That's what makes a big difference. I have like 7 notes, so let's just tackle it. Rewind the conversation. When you were talking about verbal, nonverbal. And so one of the things I teach in one of my strategic communications class is the percentage your words bring to the interpretation of the message.
Yeah.
So the words you choose, what percentage do you think actually make a difference in terms of how it's interpreted? And people always come up with like figures like 70%, 80%. And then I'm like, go lower. And then they're like, what? And it's 7%. And then they're like, what? Yes, because honestly, the way your message is interpreted, it's much more dependent on your nonverbal, on your delivery, your tone, the emphasis you use on which words than it is on the actual words you choose, which is why there's a high likelihood when it comes to emails of it being misinterpreted, because there's none of those other elements included in that email. So just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah.
And conversation.
I just want to say real quick to that our bodies will do things that we're not even realizing, right? So our body responds in ways that we can't see unless I'm sitting here, right, and I'm looking at myself on camera. But if you're in a conversation just face to face, you don't realize that your body is doing things. Like you don't realize that your body's tensing up, or that and your body will respond in the conversation. So it's very true. Like your nonverbal shows up before your verbal.
100%. And as a leader, to that point, it's important for you to understand what the meaning of certain of those nonverbals are, and to pick up on those cues and confirm understanding. If you're getting that deer in the headlights kind of look from your employee, that's your cue to say, hey, are we clear here? Do you have any questions? I feel like maybe we're not on the same page, right? It's your responsibility as a leader to dig a bit deeper for those people that you alluded to earlier that might not be as confrontational or might not be as comfortable in conversation. As a leader, you've been provided that and afforded this responsibility to help them stretch a bit and to help them really hone in on what it is, and to confirm that they truly understood what you were delivering to them, right?
Yeah, because you have to be present. So that that requires you to really be fully present in these conversations, and practice active listening. Because oftentimes we're like, okay, we're going to have this conversation, let's just do this, and you just want to be in and be out, and so you're not paying attention. So if you're not present, then you won't even catch those cues, because you have an agenda and you want to get through the agenda, and so you don't even stop to really embrace what is happening inside of the conversation.
So you're not listening to understand, you're listening to respond.
Absolutely.
Right. I have this issue with my daughter all the time. I'll be telling her something and she'll have the yeah, but look on her face already. And I'll be like, what did I just say? I just need you to just humor me here. She'll be like, Mom, I'll be, what did I just say? And she's like, I don't know, but I wanted to say, I'm like, yes, because you were listening to respond. You were not listening to understand, right?
I call it double dutching. Like the double dutching.
Oh, yeah, I know double dutching.
When's my time to get in? When's my time? So that's what I call it.
You just brought in like anxiety that I had forgotten I had ever from my double dutch days.
I don't even know how to double dutch.
Oh, I could do it, but it was always that stress of not getting whipped by depending on which skipping ropes they were using, not getting whipped on the entry. But yeah, absolutely. So that was a great point. And thank you for sharing that. I think that's a great tip for leaders to help them understand the importance of being in that moment, of being present, because you need to be aware of not only your own nonverbal and how it may be impacting the receiver, but of that individual, that employee, that team member's nonverbal, so that you can pry a bit more. One of the key sentences I always say is, help me understand your perspective. I'm also not a lawyer, but I'm also a mediator. So dispute practitioner. Yeah. So it's something that's so powerful in a mediated conversation to, you know what, I'm not really seeing this from your perspective here. So help me understand that perspective. Help me get to where you're at, and let's have a conversation about that. So that was another one of my notes. Thank you. The conversations, that mind chatter, filling in the gaps. Another thing that happens when you are in your head like that, and you are in this, you're running rampant with assumptions, right? You're filling in those gaps, is that your body's also kicking into fight mode, right? That fight or flight. So it's no good will happen there from avoiding those conversations, is just the point I wanted to make there. And finally, tell me a bit more about conversations chain things. And what was the other, you used convocabulary? Is that what it was?
Convo catalyst.
Convo catalyst. Got it. Okay. I was like, what did she just say? If listeners, if you're not watching the YouTube version of this right now, my eyes went like
catalyst.
Catalyst. I love it. I'm a culture catalyst. You're a convo catalyst. Love it.
See? Look at that. Look at that. The synergy.
Birds of a feather, right? Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a bit more about that book. You were just saying that how in the book you have very specific strategies, which I love. I love, from a consultant perspective, it's not about advising and telling people constantly, just educating. It's about giving them the tools for them to then own these things, these concepts, and practice them and hone them. So tell us about some of those tips that you do provide when it comes to courageous conversations.
Absolutely. So the framework is called the Perfect Framework. And so the PER stands for Prepare, Engage, Reflect. And so what I do is talk to them about those 3 phases of the conversation and what are some of the things that you need to consider in those 3 phases. So if we're talking about the preparation phase, we always want to know, why do we want to have this conversation? So we'll think, oh, I want to have a conversation. I need to have this conversation with you right now. I want to talk to that person. Oh, I'm going to tell them, a thing or two. But why? Why do you want to do that? Is it because you want to tell them a thing or two? Is it because you want them to improve their performance? Is it because you want to, clarify something? What is the purpose that you want to have this conversation? And then one of the other things, there's different things in there, but the other thing that I always tell people to focus on is the intention and the objective. What is it that you want to get out of this conversation? How do you want to leave the person feeling? How do you want to feel when you're done with this conversation? Because those 2 things, if you don't remember anything else in the preparation phase, those 2 things will allow you to direct the tone and the tenor of the conversation, because you'll know, okay, well, this is going off track because that's not really why I wanted to have this conversation. Or if I keep going this way, this is not going to end up the way that I want it.
Or absolutely, I agree. And I love this notion of start with the end in mind. But sometimes in that reflection, you'll realize that you need to have that conversation for something other than to benefit that other person. And it might actually help you second guess whether or not you should have that conversation. So,
right. Or if this is the right time. Yeah. Or if this is even the right time to have the conversation, right? So I always say I know that there are certain things that happen in organizations where, yes, you have to have that conversation right then and there, right? But one of the things I always talk about too in the preparation phase is to get consent around the conversation, time, place, is this people have, bad days, people have things, and they may not be able to receive the message the way that you intend for it to land in that moment. So unless it's something where, you have to be walking somebody out the door or they need to leave the organization, try to make it so that everybody is in agreement and is coming there with an open heart and an open mind to have this conversation. And then the engage aspect of it, it's really important for people to understand that this is a dialogue and not a debate, right? It's not for you to be like, you're right, you're wrong. We're not trying to force our thoughts and our judgments on other people. We're having a dialogue. So a dialogue is an exchange of information. It's around coming to understanding. And I always say that the understanding could be that we agree to disagree. Understanding doesn't mean that we have to come to agreement, right? It's just that we are going to engage in this exchange of information and we're going to come to some conclusion, whatever that conclusion is.
It's about giving each other the opportunity to feel heard.
That's right.
To say everything that I've got going on right now, you say everything that you've got going on, and then let's make a commitment to come to some conclusion of sorts.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And one of the other things too in the engagement is to really focus. So oftentimes we have a lot of things that we want to talk about, and we've now gotten the courage to go have this conversation. So since we have the courage now, we're going to bring every single thing that we've known from, the days of old and bring that into the conversation. And really what you need to do is just figure out, what is the conversation that I need to have right now? Focus on that issue, get that issue resolved. And so that you can do this again. So part of the reflect phase is to make sure that this is something that you repeat. It's also something that you need to make sure that you do not cause collateral damage once you've had this conversation. So reflecting on what was said to you, sharing what needs to be shared, or making adjustments or changes based on what you've learned, but not using that information to somebody's detriment, to retaliate against someone, to all of a sudden they were great, but now you've learned something and now you're just waiting to be able to use that against them. And also understanding in the engage phase, just to go back to that for a second, that these conversations are uncomfortable by their very nature, right? They're conversations about difficult issues, about sensitive issues. It is uncomfortable, but you've got to sit in that discomfort, right? And so a lot of employees and leaders, they don't want to, I don't want to be uncomfortable. And the minute it gets uncomfortable, we start to defend, we start to justify, we start to deflect. Those things are really warning signs for you. So if you feel yourself in those positions, then what you need to understand is, why is that happening? Why am I feeling like that? What is it that about what they said, how they said it, their body language has triggered me? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love all of that advice, all of the above. I'm also an everything disc fanatic. I'm a licensed partner with them. I love it. So when you're preparing, one of the things to be aware of is the 4 different personality styles, and understanding if there are certain personality styles who, if you ambush them for a conversation of that nature, they will feel completely defensive. And of course, to be understanding of the different styles, and to maybe send out an email to say, I'd like to have a conversation with you, and give enough information at least so that they're not, because other styles will get in their head and fill in the gaps for what that conversation might be or might not be about. And give them enough information so that they know that they need to have, but enough time to reflect and digest and prepare themselves for that conversation as well, right? So just to be aware of that in that prepare phase. And then in the engage phase, love what you said about that discomfort. I don't know about you, but the greatest strength I've found physically when I start to go to the gym again does not happen the day after, when suddenly I start to count how many stairs there are in my house. And I'm like, why are there so many stairs in this house? And has someone lowered all the chairs because they feel like they're extra low today? I can't get to them, right? But the following day, I get this amazing feeling of, I forgot I had a muscle there. How cool is that? I feel that strength. So people need to get comfortable, or not comfortable. They need to get used to, accustomed to recognizing the value that discomfort can bring, and the power it can bring in terms of changing that working relationship and fostering a level of trust and accountability towards one another, when we know that we're comfortable having these harder conversations with an understanding that it's not about attacking each other. It's rather about addressing some of the issues at play and making a plan to move forward.
Yeah, I always say that, in that discomfort is where learning occurs and change happens. Absolutely. And so we have to be open to that. And it's funny that what you were just saying about making sure that you have the information. So part of the prepare phase is around research. But before I got on here today, I was on LinkedIn, and part of it is being honest. Like you said, like give people information to be able to prepare for the conversation. So someone posted that they had received a request for a meeting, and it said goals and planning and goals or something. And so they were like, oh, great. So they came to the meeting with their notes and everything to have this meeting. And when they got on the call, HR and somebody else who was not a part of the invite were on the call. And on that call, they laid the person off. So, so it's like, when you're deciding that you're going to have a conversation, if that's what it's about, that's what it's about. Like, be honest, be open,
transparent,
right? So that people can prepare, right? So imagine that you're there like ready. Oh, great. We're going to be talking about goals and planning. And what I get is a layoff. I mean, even if I think this is part of it too, that leaders and companies really need to understand about dealing with people and their humanity, right? And having these thoughts, like, would you want that for you? Like, how would you feel if that happened to you that way? And so even in these conversations is thinking about, if the shoe were on the other foot and somebody was having this conversation with me, would I want this to go this way, right? Would I want somebody to speak to me like that? Would I want somebody to trick me into a conversation, right? And so we just have to really think from our own perspectives too, and filter that in as we start to prepare for these conversations and while we're engaging in them.
Absolutely, 100%. And what you're saying, one of the things that reminds me in terms of advising our listeners is think of your brand reputation. When I talk about the employee experience, that end-to-end journey, I talk about from the attraction phase as you're trying to, kind of showcase what you have to offer, entice them into
peacock feathers.
Yeah, your peacock feathers. You're setting up this beautiful elevator pitch, and in the interview, you're showing them the videos. And I work with companies to make sure they're delivering on that pitch and that they're not, to use dating world language, catfishing. Candidates that they come in and they're like, oh, I did not sign up for this. And it's a completely different experience, but you need to be tending to that employee experience through to the exit. And the exit piece is where a lot of companies fail, because they don't recognize that these people are going to be talking about their exit. They're going to be talking to other candidates who might have been high performing talent for you. So make sure that you're safeguarding your reputation and providing that engaging exit as well, by being transparent, by telling them what it is and letting them know what that meeting was really about. That is a horrible, for me, I'm just thinking brand reputation, man. That person's leaving in.
And in this world, in this world of TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, we used to worry about Glassdoor, but you actually, people really have to go look up Glassdoor. There's still stuff on there, right? But many people are on TikTok. They're on, and like you said, you just never know. I mean, you don't know who's watching. You don't know, and people really leverage those platforms to air their grievances and air what's going on. And so while you think it's just still in-house, no, this is now a worldwide thing. I used to talk to my clients about staying on the right side of the next hashtag movement. And now, like, I really telling them, like, you've got to stay out of newsrooms and courtrooms. You don't want to be that person. You don't want to be the trending topic on Twitter.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Just doing something just as insensitive as that can get you there, right? And so any goodwill that you have built up over time in one LinkedIn post, one Twitter post, one TikTok, one Instagram story could be destroyed. And it's harder to build that back up, right? Once that's now, and now people are going to be like, oh yeah, me too. Like I had that, or this happened here, or this, right? And so now you are fighting this PR battle that you didn't need to if you had just thought about it from a humanistic point of view.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My mom used to always say, Lori, with every choice, life is all about choices, but with every choice, understand that it takes years to build up a reputation, and it can take one bad choice to destroy it. And it's where you began. You're back to where you started before you started to build up that reputation. And to your point about it being on the web, it's out there. I don't know about you, but I researched when I was looking for work outside of the company that I was working for. I would Google that other company and I'd be like, oh, what are they about? Whoever's going to Google that place that this post was about, guess what's going to show up, right? And in a world where 1 in 4 of your existing employees are already shifted into shopping mode, they're shopping outside your company, you need to work extra hard at creating the culture that makes them want to stick around, that really cultivates that seed of loyalty to your organization. And the way you do that is not by kind of ambushing them in a layout meeting.
Yeah. And that's why my goal is really to help them develop conversational cultures. Because I really do believe that conversations change things, right? In that conversation, you'll find out so many things. We often think that we are more different than we are alike. And yes, we do have differences, right? We all have our unique quirks and our unique, amazing things that we have, but we're also very much alike, right? And there are things, I was at a conference the other day speaking, and I connected with somebody. Now, she and I both speakers, and, I didn't think anything of it. I looked through her LinkedIn profile, and she and I went to the same university at different times. And I was like, oh, and nobody ever goes. I went to Golden Gate University for law school, and I'm like, nobody ever goes to Golden Gate. So it's always like, so the next day I saw her and I was like, we went to Golden Gate. She was like, oh my God, no radio. So now we have an even, better connection around that. And so there are things that we do that we just, and we have in our lives that if we just had a conversation with somebody about it, then they, oh, I didn't know that you did that. Oh, I didn't know you like goat yoga. Oh, right. And I can't, but I would be
no, but I get what you're saying. It's about helping them uncover some of those synergies, right, some of those commonalities, because you're right that everybody has something in common. Yeah. I've played icebreaker games like that, where you have to discover one thing you have in common with that stranger right next to you, right? And so it's about helping them recognize those commonalities to then start to rebuild the relationship from there. Love, love, love that, Kelly. Yeah. I think that you are an extremely insightful and helpful conversationalist, but also catalyst for helping provide the tools and the resources to individuals to make sure they're taking ownership of that conversation, that they're continuing to work on that relationship. Thanks so much for joining us today. I want to give our audience the opportunity to continue the conversation or to continue following Kelly Charles Collins. So tell them how they can continue to connect with you.
You can connect with me at kellycharlescollins.com. That's my website, and that'll just take you everywhere. I'm also Kelly Charles Collins on LinkedIn, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. It's Kelly Charles Collins. On Twitter, if you follow people on Twitter, it's HR Law Attorney.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me, Kelly. It was a great conversation. Before we leave, what is one nugget of wisdom or strategy that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Just start talking. Start talking.
So simple, yet so powerful. Well, listeners, thanks again for joining us for another insightful episode of People Powered Solutions. Make sure to check us out on all of the different listening platforms, and we shall see each other next week.
Well, folks, thanks for joining us for yet another enriching conversation. To hear more about today's guests, make sure to check out the links in the description of this episode. Want to continue the conversation? Then head on over to our social media platforms, all of which are also linked in the description, to keep it going. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss another valuable episode.